I don't just talk about other people's stuff, I also make my own. Books in particular. To date, I have 4 books you can check out on Amazon. Operation Red Dragon: The Daikaiju Wars Part 1, Occult Mafia, Emerald of Maddox City, and the short story collection Assorted Absurdities, Tales of Kaiju Punk and Other Genres. Hop on down to the description for Amazon links to all 4 books. Enjoy whichever ones you read, and enjoy the video.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I am the Omni viewer, and I wanted to commemorate Valentine's Day this year by beheading a saint. Unfortunately, finding a saint in the godless hellscape that is our modern landscape proved to be impossible. So instead, I'm going to talk about shipping. That should be a perfectly safe and non-controversial subject that shouldn't get anyone upset at all.
Omni, there's a guy outside who says he's delivering a bulk order of MREs.
Haven't put it by the fallout shelter. Anyway, on to the perfectly safe subject of shipping.
For those who don't know, shipping is a term referring to the practice of pairing certain fictional characters as romantic couples, usually by fans who think those characters go well together. The term is said to have originated within the X-Files fandom, where many thought that Mulder and Scully had a lot of chemistry.
Naturally, the concept existed before the X-Files, but once it had a name, people noticed it everywhere and started practicing it themselves.
Some ships are serious, some are satirical, some make no sense at all, and some are objectively the best. Most of the time, though, shipping is a fan activity, and the official content either has the canon relationships, romantic or otherwise, firmly established, or just doesn't bother with them at all. Having fan ships confirmed is a rare phenomenon, but it can happen.
Sometimes, though, the official content can introduce a ship that comes so far out of left field that nobody could have seen it coming. Enter the Looney Tunes short Carrot Blanca.
As you probably guessed, Carrot Blanca is a Looney Tunes parody of the classic film Casablanca, one that I'm surprised didn't happen sooner. It was released in 1995 as a theatrical short alongside The Great Panda Adventure, and was the only Looney Tunes short made by the team behind Animaniacs. The premise is basically a condensed retelling of Casablanca with the characters played by the Looney Tunes.
Now, I've spoken at length about Casablanca in other videos, and I don't intend to repeat myself here, so go watch that video if you're interested in my thoughts. The important thing about Carrot Blanca is how it functions as a parody, and let me tell you, it is spot on.
It manages to properly condense a 102-minute plot into an 8-minute short, hitting all of the important bits without feeling like it missed anything vital, but also adding little touches that are distinctly Looney Tunes.
Part of the fun is seeing which roles the characters wind up taking. Some are obvious, like Bugs is Rick.
What's up, Doc?
Sam is Strasser.
Let's just say a little birdie told me.
And who else but Pepe Le Pew could be Renault?
Manatee Swedish meatball.
Some roles are surprises that work in spite of themselves, like Tweety as Ugarte.
You despise me, don't you?
And some of them push the limits of good taste, like Daffy as Sam. Fill in the background with a regular who's who of familiar Looney Tunes faces, and you've got one stacked cast.
Pardon my interruption, Omni, but it looks like someone's missing. Where's Ilsa?
Ah, that's where things get weird. Casablanca embodies so many different genres simultaneously that you could argue it almost transcends the very idea of genre. Many, however, consider it a romance.
Even with all of the political intrigue, wartime allegory, and moments of both levity and tragedy, what draws most people to Casablanca is the love triangle at its core. It is ultimately the story of Rick, a man trying to escape his past, only to have Ilsa, the only woman he ever truly loved, come back into his life. The problem is that she's now with Laszlo, the man she loved before and who needs her now, and Rick's desire to take her back is at odds with the virtue he successfully suppressed up to this point, to say nothing of the wartime circumstances around them. Ilsa as well is drawn to Rick, but can she really abandon Laszlo in this desperate hour?
It's a conflict that cannot be resolved without someone losing someone else, even in the best possible outcome.
It's this tale of love simultaneously lost and won that gave the film staying power long after the war it was grounded in came to an end, and it simply does not work without Ilsa being present.
Now, as mentioned, Carrot Blanca is a parody of Casablanca, with the Looney Tunes filling in the roles. There are many characters under the Looney Tunes banner, of course, but the vast majority of them are men.
There are some women among them, you know.
Yeah, that's true, but who among them was right for the role of Ilsa?
The most prominent female Looney Tunes at the time, thanks to syndicated reruns, were Granny and Witch Hazel, neither of whom were right for the role. Ilsa is meant to be alluring, and these two aren't.
Couldn't they play against type? You said that worked with Tweety earlier.
That I did, but Tweety is the exception.
Bear in mind, there was already a one-off Looney Tune based on Peter Lorre that they could have used for the role, but casting Tweety was meant to be surprising for the brief amount of time he's on screen.
And the thing is, most of the cast is not playing against type.
Remember, Bugs and Sam are in the Rick and Strasser parts respectively, meaning that they are in their typical roles of hero and villain. It wouldn't have made sense if their roles were reversed.
Ergo, Ilsa had to be played by someone who could actually fit the role of the romantic lead. That ruled out Granny and Hazel, as well as Henrietta.
Some of you might be wondering why they didn't just use Lola Bunny, and the reason is because Lola didn't exist yet. Remember, the short was released in 1995, but Lola debuted in Space Jam 1 year later in 1996.
Even if the crew knew that Lola was being developed, I highly doubt they would have been allowed to use her, because that might have been seen as undercutting Space Jam. Introducing a new character was part of the advertising strategy, after all.
A character who was available was Honey Bunny, a female counterpart to Bugs who frequently showed up in the Looney Tunes comics. However, the studio has always been oddly resistant to using her in the cartoons, and she was likely considered too obscure to get approval. I suppose Petunia Pig was also an option. Sure, she was Porky's girlfriend, but she had an advantage over Honey in that she had actually been in the cartoons.
Unfortunately, she hadn't really been featured in any cartoons since the 30s, and it's only been in recent years that she's been brought back in any significant way, so I highly doubt she was ever on the table for consideration either.
You might also wonder why they didn't bring in one of the many female characters from Animaniacs, given that it was the Animaniacs crew who made the short. My guess is that despite frequent crossovers, Animaniacs has always been considered a separate property from Looney Tunes, hence why they were never integrated together after the series ended. The same goes for the Tiny Toons, though I would hope none of them were ever considered for the role given that they're underage.
Maybe they could have come up with a brand new character, but that would have gone against the idea of this being an all-star event, and again, it might have been viewed as a way of undercutting Space Jam.
So, to recap, the Elsa role had to be filled by a pre-existing female Looney Tune that audiences would recognize and who fit the bill of a deeply troubled romantic lead. That's quite a tall order.
It is indeed, Snazzy. But as it turns out, there is one character who fits the bill.
That's right, Penelope Pussycat, the frustrated feline constantly avoiding the unwanted advances of the odorous paramour Pepe Le Pew, until his stench is erased, at which point she turns the tables. Just tweak her design a bit to make her less animal and more humanoid, and she fits right in with everyone else.
There was just one problem. Up until that point, Penelope didn't talk. Okay, maybe I should clarify that last point. Penelope was not a silent character, but her vocalizations were limited to cat noises, usually of the faux French variety.
This is an issue because Ilsa's dialogue with Rick is vital to moving the plot forward in Casablanca. If Penelope were to embody the part, she needed a voice.
So rather than overthink it, they put Tress MacNeille in the role, and the rest is history.
Please play it for me.
If you weren't alive back then, you gotta understand, this was a big deal at the time.
Penelope finally having a speaking role was even used as a selling point for the short. The impression it gave was that at long last she was finally going to take her place as an equal to her male co-stars and play a major role going forward.
And that promise went absolutely nowhere.
Yeah, this did turn out to be a one-time thing. Which is a shame, because it turns out Penelope can hold her own amongst her male co-stars.
True, her voice is technically an impression of Ingrid Bergman's performance, but so what? Pepe Le Pew and Foghorn Leghorn also have impressionistic voices, and it works for them.
Besides, the important thing is that her personality is not lost.
One of Penelope's defining traits is that despite claims that she's helpless, she will fight back against Pepe in any way she can.
Naturally, she does that in Carrot Blanca, and that actually adds to the satire of the short.
You see, the original movie strongly implies that Renault has a system for getting people out of Casablanca, but it requires certain favors from the ladies. Due to the Hays Code, the movie does not outright say what those favors are, but the point is still made clear. Ergo, this brief interaction with Pepe in the cartoon, despite not being a scene in the movie, allows them to acknowledge it while getting a classic interaction on the screen.
In fact, this short reveals that Penelope will do this to anyone who antagonizes her.
Before the climax, when she comes to Bugs for help, Daffy tries to throw her out of the club, and she tears him a new one before throwing him out.
Well, that settles it for me. This is a character trait.
Penelope is the sort who prefers to run, but has no qualms about fighting back. Also, she's emotionally manipulative. Warner Brothers could have really gone places with that portrayal if they'd ever bothered bringing her back.
But remember that Ilsa has a romantic history with Rick, and that carries over into the cartoon. Which means Penelope has a romantic history with Bugs Bunny. I wish to remind all of you at this juncture that Carrot Blanca is not a fan-made project. This is an official Looney Tunes short, approved by the studio and everything. As such, it means that even if it's just for the sake of this one cartoon, Penelope counts as one of Bugs Bunny's girlfriends. In fact, the end of the short solidifies it.
In Casablanca, Ilsa remains torn up to the very end and is tempted to stay with Rick, but then Rick gives one of the most famous speeches in film history and she goes with Laszlo to America. It's one of the few films where the protagonist doesn't get the girl, but we all understand that it was ultimately the right outcome.
Carrot Blanca ends things differently.
Bugs doesn't even get a chance to deliver a speech before Sylvester drags Penelope onto the plane, apparently having made the choice for her. Then you-know-who also shows up on the plane, and that's all the reason Penelope needs to jump ship, where she reunites with Bugs for a warm embrace and kiss. So unlike in the movie, Bugs does get the girl, and the girl is a cat who is easily confused for a skunk.
Again, I wish to remind you that this is not a random fanfiction pairing. This is canon. Or at least as canon as anything can be in the Looney Tunes. And that's why I chose to focus on this short for Valentine's Day.
People like to talk about their favorite ships on this day, and while I wouldn't call this my favorite, it's certainly one that stands out to me for how unusual it is. More than that, it makes me wonder about what might have been. Shipping aside, this short shows how much potential Penelope Pussycat has as a character, and I'm disappointed that nothing was ever done with that. No, instead they went with a generic girl power character who only stuck around long enough to develop a proper personality because the studio said so.
Between the continued presence of Lola and the canceling of Pepe Le Pew, who knows if Penelope will ever get another chance to shine.
I hear you, Omni, but remember, we'll always have Paris. And Carrot Blanca.
Good point, Snazzy. And Carrot Blanca is definitely worth watching, on Valentine's Day or any day. Until such time as we meet again, this is the Omni Viewer signing off. Carrot Blanca is only 8 minutes long, but I wonder if they could stretch it out to the same length as the movie. Well, we live in an age where everything is getting rebooted these days, so maybe it's only a matter of time before we find out.
Congratulations, you reached the end. If you enjoyed this video, you might want to consider supporting us on Patreon. Of course, the other way to support us is to go to Amazon and check out our books: Operation Red Dragon, The Daikaiju Wars Part 1, The Occult Mafia, Emerald of Maddox City, and Assorted Absurdities, Tales of Kaiju Punk and Other Genres. Also, check the description for links to DeviantArt and other platforms we operate. Thank you all for watching. We'll see you next time.